There's adventure on the high seas there. Well, not even all pirates. Hi and welcome back to the channel. My name is Chris and we've got another book review today. And today we're going to talk about Legend of Blackjack by A.R. Witham. So we're going to do this normally. We're going to tell you a bit about what the book's about. I'm going to tell you a bit about who the characters are, what the magic's like. I'm going to tell you about the themes. And I'm going to tell you about a lot of things that I liked about it. And I'll even put a spoiler section at the end, or a spoiler discussion at the end for when you've finished reading the book and you want to discuss something a bit more in depth, because obviously you're going to want to read the book. Let's start off with what Legend of Blackjack is. Legend of Blackjack tells the story of Jack Swift, who's a boy who seems to have everything. He's got a life where he follows his dad around, and his dad's a bit of like an explorer, a bit of a Jacques Cousteau. He goes on expeditions with his dad and they look for hidden treasures and all of that kind of thing, and everything's going great. And then, I mean, spoiler for the prologue, but I mean, if you don't want the prologue spoiled, just go and read the book. Father's killed and Jack's left on his own because his mother's already away. And that throws Jack's life into disarray. What were his plans beforehand? And on the eve of his 14th birthday, he gets abducted by a rhinoceros and taken through a portal. You know, run-of-the-mill kind of teenagery stuff. He arrives in a world called Keymark, and it turns out when he gets there, they have stolen him on purpose because they have a job for him to do. He is going to save the life of somebody. Except, it turns out that they meant to abduct Jack a bit later in his life because he was a very successful doctor, and they've abducted him at, you know, a young age, and he hasn't got training, etc. yet. From there, he gets thrown into this world, and it's just a typical boy's own adventure story. In fact, it's the kind of book that I thought was long in my past. I read a lot of them when I was younger, even before the Hardy Boys days and the Three Investigator days. There was the Kidnapped, there was the Treasure Island, there was Harry Pay the Pirate, there was even Sword of the Stone. It's very much in that ilk, and something that I didn't realize that I had missed quite as much from my reading experience as I had. So we're thrown into a world where kind of anything's possible in adventure terms. God, there's pirates, there's zombies, there's monsters, there's animals, there's plenty of adventure, and there's plenty of thrills and spills as our young hero goes on a voyage of discovery. Memphis is the character who abducts him and brings him across. Memphis is an interesting character in his own right, and his story evolves through some of the book, and you get to find out, you know, what his background is, why he's a rhinoceros. We go into a world where you have a set of people who are seemingly under attack from dark forces, and we have a malevolent force here. This necromancer who is looking to take over control of the world. Like, when is somebody not looking to take over the control of the world? I don't know. He gets trained how to fight. There's just a lot happens in this book, and he does that alongside a couple of others with him, a couple of mysterious knights led by a man called Valerian, who gives him some tips and tricks and uses some magic items, enchanted items, to help him on his way. And there's also some characters around his own age, both male and female, and he builds relationships very quickly with these people, all with the hope that he's going to go home soon. And one of the really lovely bits of character work that isn't quite so obvious at the start that it'll be such a part, especially because you're introduced to this rhinoceros character, this anthropomorphized character. There are additional animal companions in it, and a particularly fabulous one called Fuji, who I think is actually my favourite character in the book. He has some of the best development within it. Some other characters that come a long way have alluded to the fact that there's parrots. Rooker as a parrot is my favourite humanoid character because he's the one that shows the most progression. And I will speak just a little bit about the threat of the enemy, because we've got a necromancer here who is looking for control of the world, but he creates what is essentially a zombie-like horde in his wake to take over the place. So when people die and he raises them back up, that's what the threat is. And the threat that Jack and everybody around him will not just die, but they lose their sense of self. They'll not die totally. They'll come back, but they'll not know who they are, and they'll not be in control. And it certainly is one of the beginning and underlying themes that comes through in the book. Magic ways, it's a bit of a low fantasy. Most of the magic comes from enchanted armor and weapons, and a lot of that comes from the fact that you get great materials, you get great artifacts out of it. One of the most interesting bits about this are the themes that are within here, because while it's a young adult kind of themed fantasy, there are adult elements in it and things that both young and old will connect with. And I feel much of that regard, it was a book written for me as somebody who can sort of remember being a young boy. Certainly in reading terms and reading those types of stories and reading those kind of things. And also now as a father of children and trying to kind of see it from both sides. So while it Betray Him is written in like a pace of a young adult novel, there are certainly adult themes within here. And one of the primary themes that comes up here is this idea of father-son relationship. From a father's point of view, they're trying to instill values and ideals in the younger version of themselves that will stand them in good stead. And what does the son take from that? Even though the father dies and the father's no longer there, they're still haunting, they're still there because of the values and the ideals that were installed within them. When we pass on, it's those spirits and those ideals and those memories of who we were as people that we try and live up to. And the fact that even if when we die, we're not really dead. It does also deal with loss there in the background of how he's haunted by the loss and the impact that it had in his life. And this is where an awful lot of the darkness comes into, is Jack's life's kind of in the aftermath of his father dying, is thrown up in the air. He lacks the security, he lacks that solid basis in which to keep on progressing and growing, and a lot of the progression and growing comes from within. Which takes me to one of the next themes that comes there, which is this idea of maturity. Like, when do we grow up? When are we ready to take on events and things that happen us in life? Do we ever feel like the time's right? Or does life force us into situations where we're made to go on? Now, for some of us in adult life, that can be going out and getting your first job. That can go out making your own decisions, failing at something, and then having to hit the reset button and go again. But when you're young, especially the age that Jack seems to be, there's this thing of, well, I'm just not ready for this yet. And possibly young people are. Put them in situations where they are in a fight or flight situation and they have a choice to make as to whether they try or whether they don't. And I think in terms of life lessons, and as somebody who teaches for a living, the one thing that I have on my introductory lesson most of all is I need people to try. I need people to believe that they can. Belief and self-doubt go hand in hand, and they're a thing that we all fight with as we grow up. Even when we're much older, we have that bit of self-doubt in us, and it is something that we really need to grab forward and say, look, I believe that I possibly can do. I mightn't do it great the first time. I might fail miserably the first time, but I'll get back up and try again. And when we're much younger people, we have no problem with that. We ever remember riding a bike? I have an abiding memory of riding or attempting to ride a bike, crashing into a wall and cutting my whole face open against the outside water tap from here to here. And yet being in the hospital and thinking while it was sore and the pain was going away, I can't wait to get on and try this bike again, because that fear of failure isn't in us when we're that young. It comes with age. So no matter how capable you are, and Jack is shown to be a really capable young man, you're still unsure as to when is the time is when your talents should be unleashed. It's a real core principle, I think, of the story and the message of the book. And then you've got the idea of, well, what is home? There's a found family kind of idea. You probably got that already from the description, where he's transported with these people, some his own age, some that are outside his own age, masters, knights, all of that kind of stuff in there. But what makes a home? What makes home home? Is it the people? Is it the memories that we have and that we tie ourselves to? Is it the life that we have, the friends we have, or is it even the routine of our life? If I live in this certain part of the world where I do this certain thing, I'll do this time, I'll do that, and when I get up tomorrow, I can know that I'll do the same thing. Is that the bit that's homely to us? Or is it the fact that there's one son? What are the things that make home home, and what makes home feel like you belong? Those are a lot of the main themes that I took from the book and that I really get something out of. I hope you get an idea that while it's a young adult adventure novel, I feel that there's an awful lot more at play and at stake and being talked about here. Like, if I think about the strengths, then I think obviously the action writing and the adventure element of it, I think is really strong. Like I say, I feel it was written for me. It was a type of book that I hadn't read in a long time. Something that you loved as a young man, but as you grow up, you kind of feel like you grow out of until you watch a Marvel movie or an Indiana Jones movie or something of that ilk, and you escape back into that world. Well, it was lovely to escape back into that world now. And it's not that it's all action all the time. There are breaks where you have some contemplation for Jack. We have new characters introduced that make him be retrospectively thought of in that way, and think about who he was and what effect they're going to have on him. And he sees himself, because he's a young man, reflected in the lens of other people and how they treat him. There's a sense of wonder, and he's put in the world now where there are pirates, there's zombies, there's monsters, there's threat, there's action, there's magic, there's excitement in the world, and it's much more akin to the life that he had, or that he thought he was going to have when his father was alive. So while it's young adult, it has strong adult themes within it. Dark at times with those themes. Nothing scary in terms of, you'd be worried about somebody young reading it, but it's contemplative. It gets to reflect on the things that are important. And I think emotional intelligence is something that actually, when I look at my own kids, they're way more emotionally developed than I ever was. But they also need challenge them into thinking for themselves and thinking through problems that show that they are more capable than what they necessarily believe. You're the comfort blanket for them. You're the bit that they can always fall back on, but that they can make good decisions for themselves and think through them. I'll also say I don't care about animal companions almost never. Films, books, or otherwise. But the animal companions here are great, but especially the Fuji, the Tam. I think his evolution as a sideline character in the main part of the story is just wonderful. It's great to see, and something that I really felt enriched by. In fact, like I say, my favourite character was the animal companion, which I can't tell you how unusual that is. I'd be completely remiss if I didn't talk about the artwork that's in the book, though, as well. Now, it turns out the guy that did the artwork had the same surname as me. Not related, but it's incredible. I loved the artwork. I only read the Kindle version, and I was flicking through, and I could see things depicted that I had imagined in my head, and a lot of times it was close, certainly in terms of the world building, etc., the locations they were in. Characters, I'm completely used to that, what Valerian looked like, what Memphis looked like. I mean, I just don't get those things right, but it was lovely to see a depiction of it and kind of back up and reinforce the own world building that was in my head. And there's been some discussion about visual memory and seeing things as a movie in your head. I do, certainly for locations, but not for characters. But that's the kind of reader I am. But hopefully you'll see from some of the images I've shared here on the screen just how incredible some of this artwork is. Should all be available to buy as posters, as art. I mean, I see a Fuji, you know what to do, but the art in the book, I think, makes it feel really special. Things that I would like developed, I mean, I will say most of the things that I like developed all seem to be promised in future volumes. So would I like more character development in general? Well, yeah. I mean, who doesn't? I'd like to see more of a story arc. I'd like to see the challenge of some of these characters. I'd like to see more female characters. I'd like to see them brought through and talked about in here. Is there a world beyond the world that we're introduced here? I think all these things are possible. So suffice to say, I think Legend of Blackjack was a real breath of fresh air, to use a cliche. Not something that I normally read, but it had an awful lot of input from other people to say that they really liked it, to the point that I could recall the younger version of me saying, oh God, Chris, this would be great. Go and check it out. Ready for the spoiler section? Okay, spoilers. So I'm going to talk a bit about some of the conclusions that came from it. I think it was a foregone conclusion that the father wasn't really dead, or that he was going to stay. Not just because it would lead to more books, etc., but it felt like he was at home. It felt like he'd found companionship in ways that he didn't seem to have in the real world. I think the isolation of his natural life and the magical life that he had was definitely there. I think it was quite clear that his father, like I say, his father was alive. But while it was probably going to be Shang-Lo, it wasn't necessarily definitely going to be. It could have easily have just been the bad guy in some ways, and that the death and the corruption of being away from his son could have twisted him, etc. He could have been the necromancer in some ways. I like the floated idea of context of time and space. It's not really explored how it works insofar as, this grab that they made for him and also his father Dan, how that could have been 20 years off by a couple of minutes or otherwise. It's a nice idea to kind of flow out there, and like I say, it promises a lot for things that are coming in future. There's plenty of scope for development there. You know, how come the Tams haven't really been discovered as being as intelligent as they are? Because you've got Fuji obviously is incredibly intelligent from the very first moment. It's one of the clear things that has been written in here that they can untie knots. I mean, that stuff was really cool, and I think there's all sorts of plans or opportunities for novellas. Give us a novella about Rooker. Give us a novella about Memphis. Give us about the Knights, about the Masters, etc. All of those people in the Revolution, where they came from, and the life that they had before. There's also the opportunity to rebuild the Knights afterwards. You know, this new, almost like Star Wars-esque of like rebuilding the Jedis. So cool, the world that's been started here and created. Please God, we'll get another book. At least all I can do is evangelize how much I enjoyed the read of this book and encourage you to spread it far and wide as you can as well. But people out this far have read the book, you know how good it was. Thanks very much for watching. If you have any comments or anything you'd like to say, stick them in the comments. Get in contact with the author itself. Fabulous stuff. I'll catch you again soon on the channel. Take care.